Hi friends, Caitlin here with Sass and Stitch Crochet, and today I'll be walking you through the tutorial for the Coco Trivet. This trivet is a double thick pot holder that is very aesthetically pleasing with its stitch pattern, but is also very durable and very functional. The Coco Trivet can be made to any size, but I give 3 suggested sizes. This white one is size medium, which is 8 inches, and today in the video I'll be making the small size, which is 7 inches. You are going to need some worsted weight cotton yarn. I am going to use Dishy here. Here's a chart of how much yarn you might need based on the size that you would like to make. You'll also need a measuring tape, a 5.5 millimeter crochet hook, and of course scissors and a tapestry needle. We're going to start this project off with a slip knot. I like to hold the tail in my left hand, cross over, and then with my left hand reach down through and pull up the tail to make a loop. Insert your needle, and we'll be making a starting chain that is 1/2 inch less than the size that we want our finished trivet to be. So if I'm making my trivet to be 7 inches, I need a 6.5 inch long chain. So to chain, you'll yarn over and pull that through the loop on your hook. You'll continue doing that until you reach your desired measurement, which again is 1/2 inch less than you'd like your finished trivet to be. So I am working on a 6.5 inch long chain. Let's pause and measure. And in this case, it's okay to give your chain a little bit of stretch. All right, that's about 6.5 inches. So I can start the first round, and we're going to be doing a single crochet into the second chain from the hook. This is the first chain, this is the second chain. You'll insert your hook, yarn over and pull through 1, yarn over and pull through 2. You're going to single crochet into each chain across this row. Keep going on your own, and I'll meet you back at the end. All right, this is my last single crochet. And we're actually going to be creating a round because this trivet is double-sided. It's created in a round with the starting chain at the very bottom. So that means we're going to need to work around both sides of our starting chain here to create that round. So this is the side we just did. We're going to turn our work on its side and do another single crochet into that last chain. Then you're going to turn your work completely to the other side of the chain so that you're looking at the bottom of the chain. The stitches you just made at the top here, they're going to flip to the bottom, and we'll be working into this side of the chain again all the way across the row. So you're going to single crochet again into that last chain, so now that makes a total of 3 there. And then you'll crochet once into each chain across. This is also a good opportunity to go ahead and hide this starting tail here. You can kind of line it up with your bottom chain and crochet over top of that tail, and that's one less that you have to weave in. So you'll see here I'm just holding that tail along my work and just pretending like it's not even there, and it's just going to work into my stitches here. So anyways, I'm single crocheting into each chain across the bottom of this starting chain. And here at the end, I'm about to work the last single crochet into the last chain. And then just like before, we're going to rotate to the end and single crochet one more time into that last hole. All right, so we've done single crochet all the way around our chain, and now we're going to connect this round with a slip stitch into the first stitch. Our first stitch is right here. So we're going to insert, yarn over, pull through the stitch, and pull through the loop on your hook. That's a slip stitch. We'll do one of those every time we complete a round. Now we're going to chain one and turn. We were going this way, but now we're going to turn to go the other way. And now we can start round two. So looking at our work here, this is our chain right here. And this is the slip stitch. The slip stitch does not count as our first stitch. That was just to connect the two rounds. So we're going to be starting in the real first stitch, which is right here. We're going to be doing a puff stitch. To do a puff, you'll yarn over, insert your hook into the first stitch, yarn over and pull through the stitch. You'll have 3 loops on the hook. Yarn over, insert into the same stitch again, yarn over and pull through the stitch. Now you'll have 5 loops on your hook. Yarn over, insert your hook, do the same stitch, yarn over and pull through the stitch. Now you'll have 7 loops on your hook. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You'll yarn over and you're going to pull through all of the loops on your hook. After that, we're going to chain 1 and we're going to skip the next stitch. The chain 1 will get us over the next stitch, and we'll puff stitch in the stitch after that. So yarn over, insert into the stitch, yarn over and pull through 1, yarn over, insert into the same, yarn over and pull through 1, yarn over, insert into the same, yarn over and pull through 1, yarn over and pull through all 7 loops on your hook. Chain 1. And we're going to continue repeating that. You'll skip a stitch, puff stitch into the next one. So when you're doing the puff stitch, you're doing this action 3 times. The yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull through 1. You do that a total of 3 times, and then you yarn over and pull through all of the loops on your hook. So that's 2 times and 3 times. Pull through all the loops on your hook. Now we'll chain 1, and you'll continue repeating this all the way around. Puff stitch, chain 1, skip the next stitch. I'll meet you back at the end. Okay, so I'm near the end of my work. You can see that we've worked puff stitches all the way around, starting here, going all the way around the end, and here we are right now. Now this corner here, it can flip in or out. Right now it really doesn't matter, so whichever is easiest for you to work around, we'll address that part a little bit later. So taking a quick look at the beginning of our row, here is our first puff. That's where we'll be joining into. So let's look at the end of our row. We have 3 stitches left. So I need to do 1 more puff stitch. I've done my puff stitch and chain 1, so we'll skip 1. I need to do 1 more puff stitch here. And I'll do my usual chain 1. And now we're going to be skipping this last stitch. Don't do anything with that one. And we're going to be slip stitching into the front of this first puff here. There's a little space if you pull apart your stitch a little bit. That's where that starting chain 1 is. You're going to insert into that space and work your slip stitch. That's how you'll join all of your rows. Chain 1, and we can turn around for row 3. Okay, so this time we're going to be working our puff stitches into the skipped single crochets from that first round that we did. So So down into that space, that skipped single crochet, that's the first one we'll do. We'll be working our puffs the same way we have been. Yarn over, insert into that single crochet, yarn over and pull through the stitch. Do that 2 more times. Yarn over and pull through all the loops on our hook. And again, we'll be chaining 1 after our puff. We'll be skipping the puff. We'll skip over that. And we'll be working our next puff into the next skipped single crochet. And we'll be doing this all the way around. Puff into the skipped single crochet, chain 1. Puff into the skipped single crochet, and then chain 1. Okay, I've jumped a couple stitches, and in just a moment here, I want to show you what the other end looks like. Not the end that we're joining on, but the other end that's halfway through the round. Sometimes it's going to look a little confusing, especially in these early rows. You want to make sure not to puff into the space between the puffs, but you want to make sure you're still dipping down into that skipped single crochet. They can kind of blend together, so just pay extra close attention when you're working on this rounded edge. Okay, so I'm back towards the end of my round now, and I have one more puff left to do. There's these 2 puffs, and I'll be working between them. So I have 1 left. I'll quickly do my last puff stitch. We'll chain 1, and then we're going to go directly into joining. Now, if you look at the beginning for a second, you can see that our first puff stitch here is to the right of the puff stitch from the previous row. If you're left-handed, it'll be to the left. And so when we end our row, the last puff stitch is going to be to the right of the previous puff. Again, left if you're left-handed. So we have our last puff to the right. We don't want to put one on the left of the last puff. So we're going to go straight into joining. Find your first puff again. Find that space just before the puff. Insert your hook into that space and do a slip stitch. Now when you're working your slip stitch, you want to be careful not to pull this loop too loosely. You want to kind of keep it in rein and keep that slip stitch tight. So just pay extra attention. Chain 1 and turn your work, and we'll be moving on to the next row. And this next row, these will be the instructions for every row here on out. And these puff stitches are going to be worked 2 rows below, into the puff stitches 2 rows below. So let's take a look at our work for a moment. This is the previous row of puff stitches, and this is the row 2 rows below. And you can see here with each puff, there's that little space to the right of the puff. Left-handed people, you'll have the space to the left. And that's where we'll be working our puffs into, is down 2 rows below into that space to the right of each puff. So here's that puff 2 rows below. Especially again on the rounded edges, it's going to be a little tough to find that space. But here is that space just to the right of the puff. We're going to work our puff stitch in there. Chain 1. Now, it's going to be a little bit hard to tell where to put your next one. You feel like you're going to have to skip over a lot of stitches, but pay attention to the row you're working into and keep tracking that, and then you'll know of where your next puff stitch is going to go into. If you're looking at the previous row, you're going to get confused. You just have to look 2 rows down to better track where you're supposed to be putting your puff stitches. So like I just worked into this puff, which means this one is my next puff. Find that space, work your puff stitch, chain 1, and you'll be continuing that all the way around. That's my last puff stitch, this is my next puff stitch. Just keep on tracking those 2 rows below to avoid getting confused. Again, when you get to the other rounded side across from the join, it can be a little bit hard to tell, a little bit hard to track where you're at. So again, just keep that trick in mind of you're paying attention to that row 2 rows below. Move your hands over to find the next puff, and that's the space that you'll be working into. It just takes a little bit of extra attention when you're working those rounded edges. All right, I'm going to continue working and I'll meet you back at the end of this round. All right, I'm nearing the end of this current round. Looking back, this is the first puff that I did. And let's see, it looks like I have one more puff to work on this current round. This is where I just worked into, and this is the last puff of the 2 rounds below. So I'll go ahead and work that one last puff stitch. And chain 1. And yep, that's the last puff stitch of that current row. There's nothing over here to the left. That puff is from the previous row, but remember we're working 2 rows below, so this one is the last one here. So we can go ahead and join over to the first puff of this round. Curl your edge up just a little bit. Find that hole. And we'll work a slip stitch. Chain 1. And at this point you can already see your kind of pocket shape forming. And like I mentioned before, it doesn't really matter if it's flipped inward or outward, whichever way you find it easier to work. At the end we'll be sewing up the top, so before we sew it closed you can decide which way that you'd like it to be flipped, but for now it doesn't matter. So we're going to continue on. You can insert your hook back and make sure you've done your chain 1 and turn. All right, so we're going to go ahead and locate the 2 rounds below. This is the previous round. This is 2 rounds below. So we'll be working into that first puff. Remember, we're always working to the right of the first puff or left if you're left-handed. Chain 1, track over to find the next puff, not that one, track over, yep, that one right there. And these are the row instructions that we'll be repeating for the rest of the project, minus the last round. So we're just gonna keep doing this, and I'll check in with you one more time at the end of this current round. All right, I'm nearing the end. Looks like I have one more puff left to work. This is the start of the round. This is the join line here. So this is the last puff from the 2 rounds below. Chain 1. And slip stitch into the hole next to that first puff. Before moving on, now that we have our shaping established a little bit better, now would be a great time to go ahead and measure your work and make sure that it's coming out to the size that you are aiming for. So I was planning on doing about a 7-inch trivet, and it's about 7 inches. So that means I'm going to continue working. Ideally, I want a 7-inch square trivet. So I need to work until I have about 6.5 to 6 3/4 inches in height. We need to save room at the end for the last row, which will be a little bit different than the other rows that we've been working. So work until you have about 1/4 to 1/2 inch left in your desired height that you want. So again, continue repeating the same row instructions that we just did until you reach almost to your desired height, and then I will meet you back at the end of the video. All right, I have worked to nearly 7 inches. I've got my pocket here, and for this last round, we need to do some decreasing stitches on the last round. You'll notice on the bottom that the corners are just a little bit rounded in, but the top is very straight. So what we need to do is get this last round to curl those corners in just a little bit so that it matches the bottom. In order to do that, we'll be working 4 decreasing stitches around our project. 1 at the beginning, 2 on the opposing end here, and then 1 at the very end of the round. So we can go ahead and insert our hook back into our work with our chain 1 and turn already completed. And as normal, we're going to work a puff stitch into that first stitch. But this time you are not going to chain or do any other stitch in between. We're going to move directly into doing the next puff stitch with no chain in between. So skipping that chain was our decrease. Now for the rest of this row, instead of chaining, we're going to be doing a single crochet stitch instead. This is going to help close up the stitch pattern so we don't have holes in our work. So we're going to be single crocheting into the top of the puff from the previous row, not from the previous 2 rows. I'll show you that one more time. I'm going to do a puff stitch as normal. And then after that, track over to the next puff from just the previous row and insert your hook into the top of the puff and single crochet. Repeat these instructions until you get near the opposing edge of your work. Okay, so I've worked a few more stitches and you'll notice that I'm near the end, near the opposing edge, but I'm not right on the edge quite yet. I wanted to show you the opposite side of the stitch pattern. You see these gaps? That's why we're doing the single crochet, so that we can close up those gaps at the end of the pattern here. So now we're ready to work our next 2 decreasing stitches. We're going to be working it right as we're turning the corner here. So that's why you want to stop a little bit before that edge. So we're going to work our next puff stitch. And we're not going to chain or single crochet. We're just going to move right into the next puff stitch. So skipping that chain and single crochet was our first decrease. And now we're going to do another decrease. So again, do not chain or single crochet. Just move right along into the next puff stitch. And that will have counted as our 2 decreases on this side of our work. Okay, so now that we've done our 2 decreases, this is the first decrease, the second decrease. Now we can continue as normal and do our single crochet into the top of the puff from the previous round. And keep going until we're at the end, and we'll have 1 more puff left to work at the end. That will be our last decrease. So we've done 2 decreases here. We did 1 at the beginning, and we'll do 1 more at the very end to round everything off. All right, so I'm near the end now. I have this 1 last puff left to work. I'll do my last puff, and just like before with the decreases, we're not going to chain or single crochet. We're just going to go straight into joining off this last round. So complete your slip stitch join. And there you have it. We have these rounded edges, just like we have on the bottom. And now we're going to be sewing across the top. So take your yarn and stretch it across the width of your work. When you fasten off your yarn, you want to fasten off a length that is 2 to 3 times the length of your work. So 2, I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit more to make it about 2.5 times the width. That's where you want to cut your yarn, somewhere around there. All right, and then so normally for me personally, I chain 1 before I pull my yarn through, but this time I'm not going to do the chain 1. I'm actually going to just, right from the slip stitch join, I'm just going to go ahead and pull my yarn through. I don't want any extra chain lip sticking out at the top of this finished trivet, so that's why I did that this time. Okay, so now you're going to grab your yarn needle and you'll thread your yarn through the needle. I personally like to tie a little knot on mine so it stays on securely. And now we'll be using the mattress stitch to sew the top shut. But before we do, at this point, you can decide which direction, inside or outside, you would like your trivet oriented. You can flip the whole thing outward. Sorry for the poor camera angle here. I'm just flipping it inside out. You can flip it all out and you can get this kind of view, or you can flip it back the way that you had it. It's really up to you. There's no right or wrong way. It's just the look that you prefer. I personally don't love the look of this chain here at the bottom. I think it's hidden a little bit better facing the other direction. So I'm going to turn mine back the way that I had it. But this is the time to go ahead and decide that before we sew the top shut. Okay, so we're ready to get started. To start the mattress stitch, you'll be looking for the first set of stitches on each side of this trivet. So this is the first stitch on this side. Go across and find the first stitch on the other side. It doesn't have to be precise, but we'll be moving over one set of stitches at a time, and you'll pull your yarn all the way through. You're going from the side closest to you to the side away from you. Now we'll bring our yarn needle back around, do that same thing again from front to back through the next set of stitches. You'll always be going away from you. Make sure you pull it nice and snug. And find the next set of stitches, insert through and pull your yarn all the way through. And we'll be doing that all the way across. Do one more with you, and I'll meet you back at the end. Okay, I've got one more left. Oh, looks like one more left to do here at the end there. Yep. And the last thing that's left to do is just weave in that tail. Now, depending on the way you oriented your trivet, your starting tail may be on the inside, it may be on the outside, so you might have to weave that in. Mine is personally on the inside, so that takes care of that for me. But for this top one, I just weave it a couple times around, and then I actually just run it straight through my trivet. I just go, I find a spot and I just insert my needle a couple inches into my work and then pop it out in another location. And this is just going to run the extra length of a tail through the inside of the trivet. And wherever my scissors went, you can just snip it off right at the base here. I seem to have lost my scissors, so I'm just going to leave it as is for now. I'll trim it at the end of the video. But you can just trim that off and it's like it was never even there. And that is your finished trivet. I hope you guys enjoyed this pattern. I hope it made sense. There is also the written pattern on my blog, which is linked in my bio. You can check that out if you want. If you'd like to support my work in a monetary way, if you really enjoyed this pattern, you can buy the PDF version on my Etsy shop or Ravelry shops. As you can see here, we made the small size. There's also a medium size and a large size recommendation. Those are 8 inches and 9 inches. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, like this video, leave a comment, and let me know how you enjoyed it. And I'd love to know what color you've made yours in.